Welcome to the Thinking Legal podcast with me, David Kerner. This is a podcast about the human and psychological aspects of the legal sector. I run The Marketing Legal, a legal marketing agency, and you can find us at www.themarketinglegal.com. I hope you enjoy the show. I'm joined by Barney O'Kelly, who's the head of digital marketing at AlixPartners, and thanks for joining me, Barney.
Thanks, David. It's nice to be here.
So, jumping right into it, you're at AlixPartners currently, but you also spent quite a lot of time in the legal industry. You were at Freshfields for a while. So, tell me about your kind of career journey up until now.
Okay, yeah. So I sort of left university without much of an idea about what I wanted to do, and just happened to rock up at BAE Systems, a defence and aerospace company, on a contract in their events department, weirdly. And anybody who knows me knows I'm not the right person to be doing events. But nonetheless, that was fun. I enjoyed it. And I ended up being there for nearly 11 years, doing a variety of different jobs in PR, marketing communications, and change comms. So I got to sort of jump around all over the place. Really liked working there. And then around 2010, I got into the digital stuff. BAE wanted to rebuild its website. But then they wanted to be a bit more ambitious about how they went about that. And I think BAE, I might be wrong on this, so don't hold me to it, but I think BAE is one of the most visited websites in the FTSE 100 because of its recruitment footprint and the apprenticeship. So we did a whole discovery program on that, which was fascinating. And this coincided with the unlocking of social media in the corporate world. So I enjoyed that. And then I saw this job at Freshfields, and I'd just become father for the second time, and I was like, I could do with more money. And it was to build a digital marketing team. So I got that job, and over the next 6.5 years, built that team, rebuilt that team, evolved it. By the end, I'd taken on other parts like PR and internal comms and events again. And then I kind of had enough one day and left. They were very good about it. I just sort of reached this point. There are other things going on in my life that I wasn't particularly enjoying. And I worked for myself for a bit, did some legal sort of work with a few firms, marketing strategy, digital marketing stuff, social media stuff. And then AlixPartners became a client at the end of 2019. They were very, very nice to me during the pandemic, which as a sort of self-employed contractor, I was a bit nervous around, and then asked me if I'd go full time. And that was doing a UK marketing job. And then they asked me to take on the digital brief, and here we are. So digital has been a consistent theme in my career for nearly 15 years now.
Yeah. And you've kind of applied it to a lot of sectors, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, professional services, I think, is arguably one of the most interesting to do digital marketing, because so much of the marketing that you actually do and where it coincides with business development is digital in flavor these days. I think it's getting more challenging, not for good reasons. Like, the market's getting quite congested. There's quite a lot of volume of stuff being put out into the world. I think a lot of people are by and large chasing the same attention from the same people. So you need to get a bit smarter. And we can talk about this in, whenever you want. But I think for lots of professional services firms, getting smarter means showing you're more intelligent and putting a nicer picture on the front. I don't think that's the right answer. I think getting smarter is thinking about how really to get in front of these people. And actually, quite interestingly, from a digital marketing perspective, in some cases, that's not always the right answer.
Yeah, excellent. And I guess kind of taking it back to first principles, it's always nice to take a step back. What are the principles that kind of guide your approach to marketing?
Well, you're assuming I have any. So they've changed quite a lot over time. I mean, it's funny you talk about principles. We use principles a lot in our projects at AlixPartners. They're really good guiding philosophy for things. Obviously, that's why they're called principles. It's often the detail that's the problem. So I've become more focused on measurement, but not in the way that I think is commonplace. I care about one thing and one thing only as a measure right now, and that's meetings. I know there's that kind of expression of find the metric and move it. I think the reason why I've become quite obsessive about that is you can start to peel back the layers of the onion when it comes to meetings and start defining a little bit what contributes to securing meetings, what gives you a greater chance of success of getting meetings. And then that might be the closest we get to an attribution model in professional services, because traditional attribution models don't work very well. I think relationships are critical in professional services particularly, and that's true both within the organisation and outside of the organisation. And I like that part, because I think that's where it gets quite sophisticated, and you have to start thinking about, how you present yourself as a fully formed human being, how you engage with people, those kinds of things. And I guess the other chief principle I adhere to is you don't know until you know, right? So, professional services firms, by and large, law firms in particular, and it also turns out consulting firms, have a tendency to overthink things or want some predetermined guarantee of success, particularly when it comes to marketing. If we spend X, will we get X times 10? And the answer is, I don't know. Let's find out. And then, if you measure anything consistently over time, you'll get some sense of whether things are improving or not. It's just whether the metrics that you're valuing are the right ones. But that's a whole different conversation. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I've become much blunter as an instrument, I think, as I've got older, which is probably the opposite to how it should be. But that seems to be where I am mentally at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess kind of as you say, for this for professional services, perhaps a blunt approach is what's required, considering you're dealing with metrics which aren't necessarily kind of measurable a lot of the time.
I find myself using an Einstein quote quite often, and that's about as much as we've got in common, but it's make it simple, not simpler, right? And I think that because the practitioners in any professional services firm are such an important part of the marketing story, but that's not their primary skill set. It's not something they truly understand in most cases, and the reality of it is it's not something they've got a lot of time for. So I think you need to address that time poverty and that sort of, let's call it confidence in the round, quite head on. Which means you need to make it really straightforward, because you're effectively, for every minute they spend doing it, or every 6 minutes they spend doing it, it's costing your organisation money. So it should be as effective as possible. And the interesting thing actually is effectiveness comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, but we often get lost in concepts like quality or differentiation or distinctiveness, which are highly subjective in a lot of cases and utterly elusive in some of the others. But effectiveness is a really nice thing to think about.
Yeah. And kind of talking about effectiveness, tangentially, one of the kind of recent developments that is everywhere now, everyone is talking about it, everyone is thinking about it, even people not involved in it, they're kind of slipping it into conversations, and that's AI, which is a huge buzzword, and law firms are obviously grappling with how they use it, including their marketing teams. How have you seen it being used in a marketing context so far?
That's a really good question, and you've got me on a good day, so I can be polite and quite non-sweary about the topic of AI. All I will say is this, right? And this is my personal view, and I may well be wrong. That has been known to happen quite frequently. I think it is not quite what people make it out to be at the moment, and I think it's indicative of a broader issue I've seen throughout my career in digital marketing. And in the application of technology in any commercial context, by and large, it's still remarkable to me how many functional leaders, and in some cases business leaders, are not as conversant with technology as they should be, or as they might wish to be, is probably a kinder way of putting it. So as a result, every new technology tends to create hype and overblown enthusiasm, and then that starts creating a lot of questions about how do we do this, what should we do? I think I take a lesson from our own digital practice at AlixPartners here. We're very pragmatic as a firm in our outlook and very practical in our application of things. We're very focused on commercial impact and achieving results, right? Like measurable material results for clients, which is what sets us apart from quite a lot of other organizations in consulting. And I think the same applies in how you would look at AI in the application to any business and how you would look at AI in the application to any marketing function. So we play around with it, I'd say. We're enthusiastically playing around with it. It is a welcome but not overwhelming distraction to a lot of the main things we need to do. I think there are obvious areas where we can create some efficiencies with it, but they're quite task-based and quite sort of procedural in nature. I'm very nervous about the obsession people have with using it to write content. I think that speaks of two issues. One, that content as a word doesn't mean anything anymore because it means everything. And secondly, I think we're being somewhat dragged into the tech sector's enthusiasm for hyper SEO friendly, high volume, lead generative content, which actually doesn't have to say that much that's that interesting. It just needs to get somebody to go, oh, I'm going to download this white paper I'm never going to read. And then you're into Salesforce and you're off, right? Professional services is different. And we talked about people being such a big part of the conversation. AI doesn't do people. It's artificial, right? It can't emote. It doesn't actually think. It just compiles at speed, basically. So I think if it's doing rudimentary task-based things, or even quite complex task-based things, or there's a logic to it, or it's stacking, or it's building from pre-existing material, fine, knock yourself out. When it comes to content, particularly the types of content I increasingly think we should be looking to create in professional services, it wouldn't be where I'd start.
And perhaps you could talk a bit about what we should be doing then in that case, and how should law firms really be kind of generating those kind of human interactions successfully?
I think there's quite a lot to unpick in that. So I think for lots of my general advice when people come to me foolishly to ask me for it is when they say how can I get on here? Or how can I succeed in my job, is just get to know the business you're in, right? And that doesn't mean what does it do, but how does it do it? Who does it? What are they like? So it really comes to this kind of relationships and understanding of the organization you're in. If you do that, you'll build a picture that's based on sort of the collective view of what institutional success looks like. But you'll also get the individual view of what personal success looks like, sometimes within that broader context, and frankly, sometimes not quite aligned with it. I think that's a good rule of thumb for any organization that by and large is very people driven and very people oriented, but actually is also trying to face off to similar type of organizations to win work. And this is where the term business to business marketing bothers me, and I hate the alternative of human to human. I think that makes me feel a bit unwell. But it does, if you really approach it really narrowly, just eliminate any humanity from the discussion. And I think that's a real miss for professional services. So I think how you go about building that content is you understand how it aligns with what the business is trying to do, and then how you package it up, often through the lens of the individuals in the organization, rather than doing what professional services firms always do, is insist on telling the world they're really, really smart. Which is fine, and I get it, right? Being smart is important in what we do, but I think most of the people who are buying what we do know we're smart. I think they expect us to be smart, and I think they expect us to take care of that on our side of the street and make sure we're hiring smart people. So I'm not sure it's quite as exciting as people think.
Yeah, and so I guess kind of one thing that you have previously spoken about is kind of seeing AI as an addition, and you've already mentioned that briefly here, rather than a replacement for kind of existing employees. How can it be kind of integrated as a kind of addition to what marketing teams are already doing?
Well, I mean, I think in my world, in the digital marketing world, that's kind of being taken care of for us by the SaaS providers. I think they're all jamming AI into their various different products because it's almost like protein in food now, right? Like I've got 10% more AI than this person. I don't necessarily think it's that interesting, and I don't necessarily think the application of it is always required or even asked for. We might be slightly in faster horses territory here. But I think where you have to do things at scale is an obvious place to start. So, for example, breaking up long white papers, if you must insist on doing them, into social content. Like you can probably get an efficiency gain there. But the problem with it is, and I've seen this, me and my colleague Jason wrote an article a little while ago about the use of AI to develop content in professional services, which I enjoy doing because Jason's a very, very smart guy and a joy to work with. But also, we ran it through ChatGPT and Jasper with some bullet points that we'd noodled over email. And then we reviewed them both, and then we went back and forth in the time-honored fashion of changing tracked changes with one another a little while. And by the end of it, the document bear no, it's completely different to what we started with. In fact, the image we used with the article was the Word document with all the track changes. And it was just this morass of different colors on there where we tweaked everything. So it helped us know what we weren't looking for, and it helped us know a little bit what we thought, but we've kind of done the latter in the bullet points. So I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but that's kind of the thing, right? For that, I don't know, but for like social stuff, maybe if you can get comfortable with it. I think it is being put into a lot of different SaaS platforms, as I say, in various different ways, sometimes required, sometimes not required. I think some of the stuff you can do in Photoshop and so on around, filling in photos and all that kind of stuff is quite helpful. It might see an end to the endless use of stock imagery, of which I am also guilty. It's amazing how all these organisations who are looking for distinctiveness all have licenses to basically the same photo libraries
and use the same covers for their reports. And
yeah. I mean, but I understand why, because original imagery is costly, and also when you're dealing with smart, sophisticated people like we often are, they have quite strong personal taste. And one man's beautiful image is another person's horror show, right? Which I always find fascinating and quite entertaining, if not a little bit time-consuming. So then it gets quite difficult, which visual identity generally is anyway in professional services firms. But I think that could be quite interesting in terms of what could happen with some of the AI image stuff. And there are some nice little features and stuff in video platforms that look quite interesting. So that's kind of where I want it to be. Do you know what? Generally where I want it to be is helping teams function better. And there's some quite promising things emerging there. So they're not necessarily marketing tools, they're more productivity tools, which I think anybody who runs a marketing department would say that it would be wonderful if we could be more productive. So things that capture meeting minutes and actions from conversations would be really helpful. Frankly, if you are exchanging emails and going, let's all meet, like something that goes, these times are available for all of you, that would be huge. We're still not quite there yet. So I'm waffling now, but those are the kind of things. I think in the efficiency gain space, where it's not going to be too disruptive, it's not going to be a massive distraction from making sure you're doing what your marketing function should be doing, is where I would start.
Sure. So what are the other approaches to digital marketing that professional services firms can focus on? So we've covered kind of the kind of human interactions. I mean, what are the other things that they could be doing?
I'm going to answer in a really unhelpful way. So it depends what they're trying to achieve. And I think that I alluded to this earlier on. Like, whilst an awful lot of marketing and professional services passes through digital, and it's probably in the 90%-ish proportion, it doesn't necessarily mean all of it should. It's, if you take the types of audiences we're largely all chasing, if you look at what's going on with those audiences on things like LinkedIn, they're becoming increasingly hard force over on platforms where they actually don't always spend a huge amount of time. Now, it's not to say you shouldn't do those things, because the next generation of those people may spend more time on there, and the generation behind them will undoubtedly spend more time there, and it will become much more of consistent feature of their professional lives. But I don't think the things that CEOs, for example, read and the places that they want to go and be seen have changed that dramatically over the last quarter of a century. What's happened is we're competing for that attention largely unsuccessfully with the stuff of our own creation. So, I think those are things you should definitely look at. I think recalibrating what content means is quite interesting. I think the perpetual quest for thought leadership remains elusive, and I think that effectiveness thinking sort of process that I talked about would help there. But I think we need professional services marketing teams to do what they are doing, in fairness, is reverting to being much more strategic in nature, much more aligned with the business, a much greater appreciation for the commercial objectives of the organization, and delivering according to that. And that may take many different flavors. And actually often the hardest part on that is shifting the organization from what it knows and understands to what may be new and different that's going to help it achieve those things. So it's a slightly abstract answer, but I think that's where we are. And I think that's an exciting place to be.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think you touched on an interesting point, and that's how people within an organization can impact and influence change. So what advice would you have to people trying to kind of steer another course?
Probably two. Right, you've got to fly under the cover of darkness on the one hand, and then engage ferociously on the other, and they require sort of different speeds. So, in professional services firms, I mentioned this earlier, relationships are absolutely critical, and the more you can do to create them broadly across the organisation, and candidly, higher up in the organization a lot of the time where people are in leadership positions, the better. Genuinely, you'll by and large I would say that's a rule. The other thing though is in the background to drive forward as much of the change as you possibly can without having to ask anybody else about it. Right, and I think that can be difficult and requires quite a lot of boldness, because just because you're driving it, it doesn't mean you're always going in the right direction. Now, you can course correct, by and large. Consultation is important. Engagement is critical. If it drives too much compromise or too much catastrophizing about what could potentially go wrong, I think it can inhibit progress. And by and large, in my experience, most people like it when you turn up and do a little bit of a da-da. Now, they might sort of go, ah! But as long as more people go, yay, then go, you're probably all right. So those are the two things I think tend to work. Psychologically, they're both quite challenging, and the relationship building is quite exhausting and has to be done in a variety of different ways, largely focused around some degree of value provision, I think. So in essence, you've got to go and do something for somebody. But the other bit is a bit of boldness. But then I've always worked on the basis that that's what my job title says I should do. So logically, you're assuming I will do it.
Right. Yes. And so, something that we mentioned in our we had a kind of prep chat, and something that you mentioned is the kind of the stakeholders you're working with might not necessarily know what exactly they're looking for, and they might kind of ask you to investigate something that's a bit pointless. So how do you deal with those situations where kind of you're the source of expertise and they're looking to you for the answers, but there's also the kind of hierarchy of a professional service firm?
I use this expression quite a lot. So if any of my team have the misfortune of hearing this, sorry, but if you come at something from a position of objective truth, it can usually be quite a helpful way of unlocking a lot of subjectivity in there. So, an example would be, we've got to send this email out this week. but it's Friday afternoon. Yeah, but we said we'd send this email out this week. But okay, but do you want it to be an effective email in terms of, do you want the largest possible audience for this to engage with it in some meaningful fashion? Well, yes, of course we do. Do you therefore think that sending it at a time when a lot of people are not paying attention to these kinds of things is going to improve your chances of success? Well, of course not. So do you therefore not think that the measure of getting the email out this week is less critical than the measure of more people seeing it? So why don't we just wait until we've got a better chance for success, right? Those are the kinds of things. And I think, I sounded quite patronizing when I do that. I might check my tone. But I think own your stuff, right? Own your role. And if you are offering good advice, it's just good advice. If somebody says, I absolutely want to do this now, there is a point when you know that the fight is not really worth it, right? And actually, that relationship building thing requires this kind of careful feathering of the throttle of, I will help you because it's helpful for me to help you, and it will help us build rapport and get on with each other. Or I will help you by not doing what you're asking for and giving you a set of recommendations on what will be more effective based on the things that I've learned over, in my case, 25 years of doing this. And I think most people are pretty sensible, right? Yeah, every once in a while, there's the odd person who chooses not to be, but they're few and far between. And actually, at AlixPartners, practically non-existent, right? I mean, that's the great thing about here. Like, it took me a while, and anybody who's still in a law firm will smile a little bit at this, and I love law firms dearly. But I remember writing some stuff for people, or I said to somebody, a partner here, and I said, "You guys are really easy to work with. I make recommendations, you do them." And he's going, "Well, we assume you know what you're doing." I still laugh about that from time to time. No, but that's exactly it, right? And I think if you own your own knowledge and come at it from a position of, I'm as much of an expert in what I do as you are in what you do, let's meet in the middle, then I think that can make for really, really productive relationships, really good thought partnership, and actually really good results. And that's where I tend to find my job the most fulfilling and tend to have the best relationships on the whole.
Excellent. And lastly, and this can be as long as or short as you'd like, what do you see as the kind of future of kind of professional services marketing in the context of technology and everything we've discussed about kind of human relationships?
I actually think the biggest thing that's probably about to happen is a genuine and potentially quite strategic application of social media into the world of professional services. Everyone will say we've been doing it for years, but not really, and not well, and not in the correct way. Which I think is quite interesting, because in many respects we're playing catch up, but it does lead to some interesting questions about where your website fits into the equation, all of these kinds of things, how you're actually going to market, what the marketplace actually is now. That's quite intriguing to me. I think by and large we'll continue to do a lot of the same things we always do, right? I think often when asked that question, somebody's looking for some radical revolution or some sort of reflection that the whole thing's broken. It's not. Like, professional services marketing is hard. It's hard for reasons that are particularly specific to it. And I think for a long time, other marketers in other sectors have sort of looked down on it and gone, there. Just the 1P, really, isn't it? And I think there are still aspects of that are true, but that 1P in that context can still be really, really challenging. And I have to say, in the decade or so that I've been working in the sector, coincidentally, I suspect, like, what people are doing, there's some really sophisticated stuff going on around there, because you're right at that intersection of human relationships, which is really, really complicated, and it's a really good place to be.
All right, thank you, Barney. That was a really interesting discussion. It's always nice to hear from someone not afraid to push through the hype about AI and talk about the kind of principles that I guess are kind of pretty stable in professional services marketing. So thank you for joining me.
No, thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me.